Hello and welcome to the British Dapper, and today we're talking about the origins and the evolutions of the sports jacket. So recently I did a series on using alternative colours in suits, and today we're picking up from there and moving into the origins and the evolution of what we term a sports jacket. A sports jacket originated arguably from the 19th century, where it was used predominantly in the hunting and fishing season, and it was really down to what we term the Norfolk jacket, which was very much a full belted version, and through evolution that became a half belt, more for the aesthetic of the look, and then eventually we end up with no belt at all, where we get a typical tweed jacket or that particular style or look. So very popular back in its day, in its environment, and that was for the hunt and fishing season, so therefore it's reasonable to expect them to take on the colours of the natural environment where you would be conducting those pursuits. And so we find that regionally there will be a slight variation in the colour of the tweed or the fabric or the wool that's being used to make that jacket for that specific purpose. So in Scotland you see a few more heather notes, some light purples coming through, some reds and some burnt oranges to reflect the countryside where you've got heather and moorland, and along with greys and blues and darker greens being introduced in more Northumberland regions and the northeast, northwest. And then as you come down to Derbyshire and places like that, more greens introduced and so on. And it's a science in its own right, I suppose you could argue, that depending on tweed being one of the predominant materials being used for sports jackets, but there are wools and thorn-proof wool jackets being used as well. Having said that, trying to bring it into the modern age and the evolution of what was a very traditional garment, over time now it's a little bit dated, that look. Having said that, in the right environment, using that Norfolk jacket is still a really cool look, and with fusion of a modern style, for example changing that tie for a wool tie or something like that, changing that for something a little more like a kerchief or a cravat, changes the overall look of the garment and changes the look of the overall ensemble. So if we bring that forward into the 30s, you start seeing more sports jacket styles, the style that we are typically aware of in this day and age, and that is where there's no belt as such, and it's a slightly different cut on the jacket, very similar to the one I'm wearing today, and you can see that this is a 3-buttoned version. It's a notched lapel, very straightforward, simple colours, but very effective with the right tie and trouser combination. In this case we're using some burgundy shoes, and I feel that that's a really good look for a more traditional way of wearing a tweed jacket. There are other materials that can be used besides tweed, so heavy wools can be used as well in a sports jacket, and we see the migration of style from the typical tweed look where we have a very plain colour with a overcheck on that to something much more complex, and you start seeing more houndstooth jackets being used, and the colours that come through in the houndstooth gives you much more choices to use in your tie and your overall ensemble, picking out some of the notes from the actual jacket. Besides the houndstooth look as well, we then start seeing other styles coming in. For example, we start seeing Glen Plaid. That's quite a good look as well, and I think that's a really outstanding sports jacket. It's got a lot of character, but it can be very overwhelming. So I think with the rest of the ensemble, you're looking at very plain, simple colours and nothing too distracting from the actual jacket. I think the jacket is more the focus of an ensemble with something like that. But again, other materials can be used. It doesn't have to be wool, and especially in the summer months, then we start seeing linens being used, and we start seeing wool linen mixes. Cotton is a very good one that you can use, and I think overall that sports jacket, although it's changed from the Norfolk jacket, has evolved, and it's still a really good look. And even to this day we see people wearing versions of this heavy checked version of a shooting garment, and of course the colours have now become much more vibrant, much more challenging. So this sports jacket has evolved a great way into the modern sort of psyche and colour schemes that we would use, rather than stay traditional and in the hunting fishing season. But again, this all comes down to using these items to express yourself and how you want to look. And there are a myriad of different colours that you could choose from. And some of the colours that I stick with, because there's such a vast palette of colours, I stick with those dark browns, hay colours, quite a grassy green sort of look. Whereas you can introduce blues, greys into an ensemble with sports jackets. So it's really dependent on your personal style. I tend to stick more with the grassy notes, but having said that, there are other colours where you get burgundies in the colour as well. And one of the great things about Donegal tweed, especially with the barley corn effect, it is little beads of lots of different colours, and I think that's a really great way of looking at a jacket material. When the light catches in certain directions, you get different sheens, if you like, off the actual material. Gives you slightly different colours as well, and quite a vibrant colour when you actually get close to somebody wearing a jacket, picking out all those colours in the wool. And again, those Glen Plaids are really prominent even in Donegal, where I know it's most people consider that to be the barley pearl effect. You do actually get Glen Plaids and other patterns being used in the actual weave. And there are some great mills out there producing this wool still producing these fabrics that are 100% wool, or they are a mix with cashmere. Really does give it a softness and a very comforting feel to wear, and they're very good at maintaining you some warmth in the cooler parts of the year, whether that be on their own or with an overcoat over the top of them as well. So they are very versatile as well as an item, and I think if you take them out of the country environment and introduce them into the city environment, they're still very striking. And I've had many compliments in London walking around wearing this particular jacket. And don't get confused between jackets and coats, because you will very often find from a tailor's point of view, he will always refer to the jacket, what we term a jacket, as the coat. And it is just the way that they use that terminology. But it is essentially the same thing. There is no difference. And an overcoat is a different garment to what we would call a sports coat. So lots of little ideas there for you, and hopefully some inspiration from the actual images that we put up with this particular video. Take care.